Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 8, and today we're joined by Brett Anderson, who's going to be talking about his last big ride, lastbigride.org.
I have met Nick. I spent some time with him and his family when I rode my FJR through Europe. And I had kind of known Nick through online earlier, through Instagram and stuff like that, and through the AJP. We have a little technical WhatsApp group and everything. And so finally got the chance to meet him, and I stayed at his house for a couple of days. Just great guy, really good guy.
Yeah, he seems quite a character. We've kind of got to know him through being in these films and doing this podcast, and he's always very, very sarcastic to us.
He told me to be prepared, but he said it wasn't big enough, but with my largest spanner. So that's my big tool.
There should be a separate category for adjustables. Whoa, that is pretty impressive, though.
It's quite a big one.
Yeah.
Brett's got a massive one.
It's a good-sized one. It's a massive tool.
Well, you're in America, Brett. Is that a metric? Well, it doesn't, doesn't count, does it?
Did you really say that?
Yeah.
Edit that out.
I'm so leaving that bit in. Just for the listeners, Noel just looked at an adjustable spanner and asked if it was metric.
Oh, God.
Well, in answer, it says 18 inches right there. So
there we
go. You see?
Justified.
So I'm in a town called Hot Springs, Virginia. I think it's got about 800 people. Our whole county has 4,000 people. We don't have a single stoplight in the county, which is wonderful. And I'm right along, I don't know if your listeners have heard of the backcountry discovery roads, much like the TET or the ACTs over there. I'm on one called the Mid-Atlantic Backcountry Discovery Route, and I'm on Section 3, so I'd say it's a little under halfway through it. It's about 5 miles from my house or so, and the riding here is wonderful. We've got great mountain roads. I'm about 10 miles from the West Virginia border. We have tons of just public lands all around me with roads that are through them. Some of them are gated part of the year. Some of them are open all year round, but it's just great riding everywhere around here. If you want to do off-road, there's plenty of that. Street riding, plenty of curvy mountain roads. We've got elevations from all the way up to 5,000 feet. Dirt riding, we've got several national forests between Virginia and West Virginia all around me with lots of Forest Service roads and everything from gravel to dirt to single track, whatever kind of riding you want to do. It's quite nice, all out my back door, basically.
And it's all legal to do, is it? Because we're quite restricted as to what we can ride in the UK.
Yeah, it's all legal here. That's in fact, the Forest Service roads, even though they're dirt roads, you have to have a plated bike to ride on them because they're considered public roads. So I can't think of the only time it's illegal. Certain roads will have a gate across them, which the Forest Service closes during certain times of the year. They'll open it and close it. I don't know if that's for preservation or I know they open a lot of them during hunting season. Of course, then you got to be careful you don't get shot back there. But hopefully they hear you coming.
Do you always ride with spark arresters then?
I should say yes, but the answer is no.
But is that a legal thing? I've only asked this because I once bought an FMF pipe, for my XR650L, and it came with a spark arrestor in. I thought, what's this? And it seemed to be more of an American thing than it was certainly a European thing in terms of law, I thought.
It is required, I believe, in the National Forest. I can't say all my bikes have one, and the Rangers are very few and far between, so the chances of you getting actually checked, I think it's probably more important in the West where you have a lot more danger of forest fires. Out here, we don't really, I can't think of the last time there was an actual forest fire anywhere even near me. I mean, we just don't get that kind of dryness like you do out West.
So did you say there's no stop lights or stop signs?
No stop lights in the whole county.
You've no stop lights. You've got endless trails. You've got no law enforcement.
Yes.
This sounds
Rider's heaven.
It really
does
is,
sound, doesn't it? Yeah. Amazing.
So did you grow up in this state?
No, I've been here since '99, but I grew up in Southern California.
Tell us a little about your riding history. When did you start riding? Did you have a parent that rode? Did you race as a kid, or how did you get into it?
My dad had ridden motorcycles, but he wasn't like an active motorcycle rider when I was growing up. I got into it mostly because other kids that I knew, friends from school and stuff, were into dirt bike riding. And I would see that and think, like, I want to do that. And so finally, I think we went out and bought an old used, I believe it was a Honda 80 or something like that when I was probably, I don't know, 10 or 11 maybe. Fixed it up. I think it needed some work. I don't even think it was a straight dirt bike. I think it was it was probably some sort of enduro bike. And I used to ride it around. We lived on a cul-de-sac, so I used to ride around the cul-de-sac in it, learning. And I'd go out with my friends. We'd put it on a trailer and put all their bikes on trailers. And we lived about 2 hours from the desert. So we'd go out to some of the public deserts like Anza Borrego or Salton Sea were popular areas where there's just lots of off-road riding. And we'd ride out there, and I'd ride with my friends. And I think I did that all the way through high school. I had that bike. I think it was that same bike. Maybe I got a bigger bike at some point. I just don't remember. But because that bike actually it must have been an enduro because I remember it was street legal and plated. So when I was old enough to get my motorcycle license, I got my motorcycle license and then traded riding a bicycle to school for riding a motorcycle to school. I continued that through high school, and then I think I just continued in college once I got more into cars. And like a lot of people have, there was that midlife stretch where I didn't ride for about 12 or 13 years from the time I entered college till I was in my early 30s.
You mentioned there, just really piqued my interest. You said there was a public desert. We don't have those in the UK.
Yeah.
What's a public desert?
It's public land. It's in the desert. Yeah, it's just public land, like a Bureau of Land Management land or maybe a Forest Service land or something like that. But it's just open to anybody to use, and most of the time it's all users.
So you can just take a 4x4 or a motorbike and pretty much just go anywhere you want.
Pretty much. There's one area called Glamis that is these huge sand dunes reminiscent of something you'd find down in Africa. And people take, old modified Volkswagen Bugs or special dune buggies, and they go out there and they go up the huge dunes. I remember my friends had what we called a rail because it was just basically big metal tubing with a old VW engine in the back of it, and it held 4 people. And I remember going up some hellaciously, scarily steep hills in that thing and just thinking, oh, geez, we're going to tip over backwards. Oh, shit.
We're living in the wrong country now.
We really are. Do you look back on that time, Brett, of riding that little 80cc bike around as a kid as like the best biking of your life? Because I think back to my sort of childhood riding. I feel like I've spent a lifetime trying to recreate that feeling I had as a tiny kid razzing around on a little bike.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I think I always felt a little intimidated by the other kids because I had started for that area of the world where people do a lot of dirt biking. I'd kind of started late at 10 or 11, and most of them had probably started riding when they were 5 or 6 on a 50 or whatever. I would have trouble keeping up with them because they were more advanced than me and had been riding longer. So I remember at times trying to, they'd all be going up a big hill and I'd be a little tentative and I'd stall out halfway up the hill and have to, go back down. And they wouldn't notice that I was gone. They'd be all way up ahead somewhere and I'd be struggling. But it was fun. I remember it was some of the best riding I'd done. And back then you don't have as much fear as you do when you get older.
I mean, this riding as a kid and learning at that age, this really must have helped you. Like it helped me for my riding later on in my life. It's a really good foundation, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I think dirt bike riding is such a good foundation for any kind of riding. It sets you up with skills that you don't get if you've only ridden on pavement.
So when you came back to biking later on, what was the reason for that and what did you go for?
I went right into adventure riding. I think, I've never done the Harley cruiser thing, even though I'd say that's probably 90% of the riders in the U.S. or the bikes, I should say, are Harleys. I think I read once where it was about 90%. It might be a little less now as adventure bikes are becoming more popular. But you still, even now when I go out riding, I don't see many adventure bikes. So yeah, when I came back in, I had a friend of mine that I'd known and ridden dirt bikes with as a kid. We were talking one day, we were still friends, and he said, yeah, have you seen these BMW? They're like big enduro bikes. He was talking about the GS, of course. I hadn't seen it. So I looked it up and I thought, wow, that's a cool bike. I want one of those. So I went right to an 1150 GS and bought a big Bumblebee yellow GS. And I think my motorcycle license had expired, or I had never, when I moved to Virginia, I hadn't had it transferred or something like that. So I had to go out and do the course again. But it's so easy. I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody in the U.S. about our courses, but they're ridiculous compared to what yours are. Yours actually train people to ride a bike safely. Ours train you to ride a motorcycle in a parking lot.
You just have to point at a motorcycle.
Yeah, you have to ride through some cones. You have to stop before some line. You have to be able to ride slowly, but they never at any point take you out on a street and actually make you ride in traffic. And I hadn't done that in quite a while, so it was a little like doing it all over again. And this was a much bigger bike than I had ridden. You know, I hadn't ridden anything bigger than probably a 125 since I had stopped riding. So all of a sudden going to 1150 was a bit intimidating, but I took some rider courses. Do they have the Motorcycle Safety Foundation over there?
It has a couple of things that are quite similar. We have the Institute of Advanced Motorists that do advanced safety training, and there's a couple of others as well. Yeah. And yeah, very good. I did the IAM one and thoroughly enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. I haven't crashed yet anyway.
They have the Motorcycle Safety Foundation here, and they do both a beginner course where you just get your license. And since I went out and just got my license on my own, since I had experience already, and then they had the experienced rider course, which I went out and did, which was a bit more in depth, you know, emergency braking, emergency cornering, braking in a corner, things like that. And then I did a BMW off-road course on a GS. So that really helped handling the big bike.
Did you have plans for a big trip then when you bought this bike?
I didn't have any plans what to do. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just liked the look of the bike. I've always liked off-road things. And I thought, well, this will be fun. And I just started out riding locally. And, you know, like everybody who's a new rider, even though I wasn't brand new, I just started locally and then gradually branched out a little further and further from home. I think my first long rides were down to see my dad, who lived in Georgia. That was about 800 miles away. And mostly I just did roads then. And I was really tentative about doing off-road on that big bike initially, but I got more and more comfortable with it. And then I ended up doing some rides across the country and back out to California and back. And the airline I work for has its training center in Denver. So I've ridden out to Denver probably 5 or 6 times when I had like a month-long training to transition to a new airplane. I would ride out to Denver and then just have my motorcycle. I'd always schedule it for the summer and go out there and ride the mountains, and I'd have my motorcycle with me on my days off. It was great.
Now, Brett, you're a pilot.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, I have a question, but I'm not sure what the question is. But it's something like, if you were to compare flying a large airliner and riding a motorcycle, which is kind of the scariest to you, or which do you see as the riskiest?
I wouldn't say either is scary to me, but the riskiest one's definitely
You're probably not doing it right then. You should.
Yeah.
If you're not crashing, you're
not trying hard enough.
Not trying hard enough. Yeah, that's what they say.
No, the riskiest is definitely the bike on in traffic. Off-road, I don't worry about it too much. Where I get scared is sometimes, I get myself in situations off-road where I think, oh man, I'm up here on top of this hill. I got to go down that hill, and that's really steep.
And pilots, like you're an airline pilot, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So being an airline pilot, it's not like being an actor. They don't kind of say you can't do any risky things like ride big motorcycles.
No.
Okay.
They don't tell me what I can do on my off time at all.
I'm guessing though, with a motorbike, you've got 1 pillion. With a 737, you've got 300 or 400 pillions, haven't you? Which creates its own safety issues.
Well, it can, yeah. There's plenty of issues to go around when you passengers sometimes.
I guess part of your job when you're doing a lot of traveling, you've got to do quite a few trips abroad as well, haven't you?
Yeah, in fact, that's what I've done for the last 20 years predominantly, is just flying abroad over to the UK, over to Europe mostly. I've probably been to London a couple hundred times now.
You quite often fly into somewhere, and if you've got some time, you'll hire a bike and travel around a bit.
I've done that a few times. I wouldn't say quite often, but I have done it a few times. The most memorable time was in Porto, Portugal. I rented a GS and went and rode the Douro River Valley, which, if you haven't done it, is just beautiful. Yeah. And then the memorable part of that was not so much as much as I like the Douro River Valley. The memorable part was when I brought it back and I went to fill it up. I put diesel in it on accident.
Oh,
Oh, sounds expensive.
Yeah, it cost me about 300 euros.
Was that just because foreign fuel stations can be very confusing, can't they?
Yeah, it was just confused. I think it was confusion and tiredness because we only had about a 24-hour layover. So we got in that morning and I had my riding gear with me. I went straight to the hotel, changed to my riding gear, went straight down to the rental place, picked up the bike. And so by then, it's probably 5, 6 in the evening when I'm bringing the bike back to return it. And, I'm just exhausted because we'd flown all night. On top of that, I don't speak Portuguese. And I remember in Portuguese, gasoline, now that I know this, gasoline is gasolina, but diesel also looks a little like gasoline. It's gasolio. They both start with gas. So
exactly.
And the colors of the pump handles were different than they are in the U.S. In fact, they were actually reversed. In the U.S., diesel is always green, a green-handled pump, and regular gasoline is always black. Well, there it was the exact opposite. So I remember looking at them and thinking, well, that says gasolio and that says gasolina, and that one says something simple, and no, that can't. And so I just picked the gasolio because it was the black the black handle.
So was it the smell? Was it the smell that got you, or did you fill the whole thing right up? No, it wasn't
even. I didn't even smell it. Like normally, you would think you would smell diesel, and I didn't smell anything odd. I just put it in, and it didn't smell odd to me. I mean, I didn't put it up to my nose, but it wasn't until I filled it up and was about a half mile down the road and started pinging and jerking and everything, and I just thought, I think I did something bad. When I got back to the rental place, I told the guy, I think I might have put diesel in it because it's not running so good. And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, you are the third American that has done this." I said, "Well, if us Americans keep doing that, maybe you should tell us beforehand, put gasolina in and not gasolio, so that we know, because clearly it's the same mistake we're all making."
What's in the garage now?
So in the garage now is the Touareg, the 2022 Aprilia Touareg 660. I've got a 1200 GS 2018 Rally version, and I've got an AJP PR7. And then next to all of them, dwarfing all of them, is a Swiss Army Pinzgauer.
Well, I really want to talk to you about that, but I don't know if we're on the right podcast. But
I know we need different.
I think we should. It's an off-road vehicle. It looks great. Tell people what it is, Brett.
So it's 50 years old, 1973 Swiss Army. It was originally made in Austria, and it did service as a radio operator's van in the Swiss Army for I don't know how many years. And then someone brought it over to the States at some point, and then someone took it to Canada at some point, and I bought it from the guy in Canada who had fully restored it and really pimped it out and made it a pretty nice, kind of almost like an expedition vehicle.
What engine does it have in it?
Oh, that's incredible. It's a whole 89 horsepower air-cooled 4-cylinder engine. that's geared very, very low, so you can pretty much go up anything, but you're not going to go anywhere fast.
4-wheel drive as well, presumably.
All 4-wheel drive. It's got hydraulic lockers, so you can hydraulically put it in 4-wheel drive. You got 3 levers in the cockpit. You can put it in 4-wheel drive. You can put it in, and then you can lock the front and rear differential as well.
It's a beautiful piece of machinery, isn't it?
1973.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It looks like, I would urge anyone to head over to your Instagram account, have a look at it, but it looks a little bit like the Land Rover 101, doesn't it? Are you familiar with that vehicle?
I've never seen that.
Well, yeah, Land Rover made a similar looking thing, but this looks it looks in great condition. So yeah, it's all been done up.
Yeah, it's actually probably one of the nicer Pinzgauers around. There's quite a few of them around, but most of them have been beat to hell. People use them for off-roading, and they haven't been. They've been bashed around quite a bit. So this one's actually quite nice.
And you give yours a nice life. You don't do anything crazy with it.
No, yeah, I've never been into the 4-wheeling. I bought that because it looked cool. I like the way it looks, but and it's fun to drive around. But no, I'm not into 4-wheeling. I'd much rather ride a motorcycle off-road than drive a truck off-road. You're just so slow when you're 4-wheeling, and then you got to have. It's kind of scary. I get more scared in a car off-road than I do on a motorcycle because you're so close to the edge. On a motorcycle, you can get away from the edge of a steep drop-off. I
got a huge shock the first time I went in a Land Rover up a track at just how bumpy it was. Just getting thrown around on a bench seat. I couldn't believe it. I don't know why. I just thought these things would be quite comfortable. I didn't realize it's just a day of discomfort.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. And it's slow.
Yeah, and I've had a Land Rover and I've taken it down tracks, but I just find it incredibly anxious because it's such a big thing. I've seen too many videos of vehicles rolling unexpectedly and things like that.
Yeah, at least if you if you go down the bank on a motorcycle, you can separate yourself from the vehicle pretty quick. But in a car, you're along for the ride.
Tell us about the Touareg, because it's quite a new bike, isn't it? And it's new over here. And our friend Alex seems to think that he's going to get himself one. And they do seem to be gaining a bit of momentum in the UK. Are you enjoying it?
I love it. It's my favorite bike now. I bought it initially because I wanted something lighter than the GS to take down through Central America.
The Pinzgau is probably lighter than the GS.
Well, that may be true. Yes. The Touareg has become my favorite bike because it's so good as an all-rounder. I mean, people always say the GS is good as an all-rounder. Well, now I want to say the Pinzgau. The Touareg is much better as an all-rounder than the GS because it does off-road so much better than the GS. We've all seen people doing crazy things on the GS and they do them well, but for the average rider like myself, I'm not going to take it on some of the crazy things that I see, some of these professionals doing on it. The Touareg makes that much more accessible. I've taken the Touareg on things that behind a guy on a 600, riding behind a guy on a 600 dirt bike, and I was keeping up with him on the Touareg, and I was not expecting that hard of a trail. When I asked him, I was thinking, what are we going on? He said, oh yeah, it's pretty easy. We'll go on. It was a much harder trail than I thought it would be. And on road, it's almost as good as the GS. It doesn't have quite the power. So if you're riding 2 up, you're not going to pass people as quick or anything, but it's got just about in fact, I put a little windscreen deflector on top of it. And so now it's tall, the windscreen's tall enough and it's comfortable. I've ridden, 500 miles in a day on it on the highway and had no problem.
We discovering any reliability issues, any issues with them yet?
I have not had any problems. I've seen people online on some of the Touareg groups that are having problems, but I tend to think that the people you see that are having the problems are the small minority because most of the people that have no problems don't say anything. Problems I've seen is a few people with some oil weeping from some little drain hole somewhere. Like I said, I've had zero problems. I had a slight oil seepage from the oil pan, maybe 3,000, 2,000 miles in, and I just tightened up the sump bolts a little bit, just gave them a half turn each, and that was all it needed, and not a problem since. 8,000 miles on it.
I'm just looking at pictures of it because this isn't a bike I'm massively familiar with.
Well, it's quite new, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Gorgeous. Is yours the blue one?
Mine's the blue one, yeah.
Blue and white, best colours, yeah. Gorgeous.
Fastest colours.
The main reason you came onto the podcast, Brett, was to talk about the last big ride. Do you want to sort of tell people what the last big ride is and probably more importantly, why you're doing it?
So I came up with the name because I was, as you guys know, I was diagnosed with a terminal disease called pulmonary fibrosis. It's a lung disease. It's irreversible and incurable. So eventually you either have to have a lung transplant or you die. It's pretty much got it's not like and I'm not belittling cancer at all when people have it, that's serious too, but you can get treatment and go into remission for cancer and survive it and continue on with your life. In fact, I did. I had cancer when I was 13 and did all the chemo and everything, and I'm still here. But with pulmonary fibrosis, there is no cure. You're never going to go into remission. The best you can hope is that it will last you a while. Everybody's different. So I had no idea how long that I would last. They say the average is 2 to 5 years after diagnosis, but some people only last a year and some people last 15 years. It's really highly individual. So I came up with that. I knew that I wanted to do riding. I mean, I love riding, and I had some bucket list things. I wanted to see as much of the world as possible. The biggest one I wanted to do was from my home in Virginia down to the tip of South America, Ushuaia. But I also wanted to ride more in Europe. I mentioned that I had a FGR 1300 that I bought in Ireland, and I wanted to see, even though I've been to Europe quite a bit, I wanted to see more of it from the seat of a motorcycle. So I went over last summer in 2022 on the FJR and took it through, I think, 13 different countries in Western Europe. It was about a month and a half. Ended up in Edinburgh. And while I was on that ride, I came up with the idea of calling it for Instagram the last big ride. I really do believe it probably is going to be the last time I do a big ride like that in South America. I knew that my physical capability, especially of handling a bike off-road, was going to eventually decline. And so I wanted to do this stuff while I was still physically capable of doing it. And in fact, it did decline. And then while I was doing that, I came up with the idea of doing a fundraiser for it. So initially I was going to start my own nonprofit and do it. And well, that's a lot of paperwork and a lot of taxes and a lot of things you got to deal with, mostly for the Internal Revenue Service. So I decided instead of doing it that way, I would link up with a nonprofit called the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. They fund research as well as awareness for the disease I have. I started an Instagram account, The Last Big Ride, as well as a webpage, lastbigride.org, where people can go, and then there's a link that they can donate, and that takes them straight to the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. And as of today's date, I think I've got about $18,000 that people have donated. And so getting closer, my goal was originally $25,000, and I still hope to make that goal at some point.
So if the 1,000 people that will listen to this in the next week all donated $6 each, that's about what, £5? We'd hit your target, wouldn't we?
Let's do it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Come on, everybody, we'll do it. We'll donate this month's Patreon money, which is the equivalent of 10 people. That's how many patrons we've got. We'll get that
would be awesome.
So what's that website again?
Lastbigride.org.
How long have you had it for, and what are the effects on you now?
Initially, I came down with what they thought was pneumonia in August of 2021. In fact, it was when I was riding the Irish ride on the FJR, going around the island with my wife. I got not terribly sick then, but when I came back, I went and saw a doctor. I was just having some coughing and stuff, and they initially thought I just had walking pneumonia, gave me some antibiotics. Didn't help. Went back about 2 weeks later. They gave me some stronger antibiotics, still didn't help. At some point, I just got worse and worse, where I was having trouble breathing, to the point where I remember walking up a jet bridge, finishing a flight, and pulling my bags up the jet bridge and being so short of breath, I had to stop and sit down in a chair in the top, which is very unusual for me because I was always a runner. I'd run 3 or 4 miles a day and it would lift weights and everything. I was pretty fit. So I realized it wasn't pneumonia, and it wasn't getting out of shape. It was something else. So I went back to my normal doctor. I'd seen a different doctor those first 2 times, and he took a chest x-ray, and he sent me immediately. He said, I've never seen a chest x-ray that looks that bad. You go into the emergency room. And I ended up being in the hospital for 5 days recovering. They still thought it was something. It was basically an autoimmune disease called eosinophilic pneumonia. Eosinophils are white blood cells that, and in my case, for some reason, they were attacking my lungs. They didn't know why, but they now saw my lungs as a foreign substance to be attacked. They put me on high doses of prednisone, which is an anti-inflammatory, and that helped. Over a couple months, I got better and was able to go back to work and go back to riding and stuff. But I hit a plateau. Didn't get any better for a long time. Went out to the Mayo Clinic here which is a top pulmonary hospital, top everything hospital here in Minnesota. And they diagnosed me in April with what's called pulmonary fibrosis, which is just another way of saying your lungs are scarring. And when your lungs scar, all those little air sacs in your lungs, the alveoli, become brittle and they can't deliver the air anymore. When that happened, I knew after doing some research that it was going to be terminal, but not knowing how long I had, I wanted to do the rides. And where I am now is I'm down to about less than 50% total lung function or volume. My lungs can only transfer about 33% of a normal person's lungs can of oxygen to my bloodstream. That must have been a hell of a thing to be told, and I'm intrigued to know, because I guess what I went through recently, I had a bit of a. I decided personally that I had cancer, and that was it. I was going to die, and this was over a period of about 10 days. And I think the interesting effect that it had on me is it really made me think about what actually was important to me. Right. And I'm guessing you went through a similar sort of thing. You do tend to go through a self-evaluation of what's important. And of course, family and friends are important. You want to spend time with them. But there's also things you want to achieve in your life. There's things that, and for me, I really had always wanted to ride probably for 15, 20 years to the tip of South America. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I talked to my wife about it. And I said, hey, if I did this, do you want to come with? And she said, hell no. So she said, who's going to watch the dog? I said, who's going to watch it? But she didn't want to come. She didn't want to sit on. She did Nova Scotia with me a few years back, about 3,000 miles and maybe 3,600 miles. And she said that was enough for her. So
did she go on the Europe trip with you then, or was that by yourself?
She did Ireland with me, around the island for 10 days, but she did not do the European trip.
So did you go from Ireland down to Spain? I saw the map of it, but I couldn't work out which direction you'd gone in.
So I went down, you can pick up a ferry out of just south of Dublin and go to Bilbao. Took the bike to Bilbao, rode the northern coast of Spain down, then the coast of Portugal down to Lisbon, where I actually left the bike. The bike was in Lisbon when I started the big trip. I left it stored in Lisbon for about 3 or 4 months or so. Then picked it up in, I believe it was July, and rode 12 or 13 different countries.
That looked like a huge trip. But we could do a separate podcast probably on that trip. But it ended. Just tell us how it ended.
It ended, that part of the trip ended fine because I stopped in Edinburgh where I had friends of friends who I met up with, and I stored it with one of them. Then 2 weeks later, we were going to come back. I was going to bring my wife. So I went home. I had some doctor's appointments I had to attend to. Went home for 2 weeks. My wife was going to come back, and we were going to do 2 weeks of the Scottish Highlands, which we were both really looking forward to. We get to Edinburgh, pick up the bike, go to our hotel, check into our hotel, go meet one of these friends for dinner and drinks that night. Ironically, we were even joking about whether or not we'd get back and the bike would be gone. Thinking, of course, that was not even a possibility. And he even said, well, it's in a well-lit area. It's locked up. You'll be fine. Well, we got back, and my wife said, let's go check on, we named the bike Fiona because it's Irish and it's red. So I called it Fiona, my redheaded lass. So we go to check on it. It's gone.
Oh.
And I thought, holy shit. At first I thought, are we looking in the right place? I've never had a bike stolen before. It's one of those things where your heart just sinks and you think you must be mistaken. You must have left it somewhere else and you're in the wrong area. And my wife says, no, this is where you left it. And I said, you gotta be, excuse my French, you gotta be fucking kidding me. We've been here one day and the bike is gone. I was just astounded because it was a well-lit area. It was a fairly well-trafficked area. And we had the bike with a big, huge kryptonite cable lock around a light post.
Oh, God.
So I just thought, anybody who nicks a bike is just going to be a crime of opportunity. So if you make it hard, they're not going to bother with it. They'll go on to one that's easy. But I guess these little bastards carry an angle grinder with them.
That's terrible, terrible.
We've just had a friend of ours has just had his garage broken into and both of his bikes taken. And bizarrely, 2 days before that, we were talking on a chat group. We were saying we should do a podcast on motorbike security because there's a company called Light Lock who we're going to talk to in a few weeks' time. And they do this lock that's covered in this ceramic called baronium, which basically you can still cut through it with an angle grinder, but it takes 4 discs to cut through. So you kind of think, well, that, it's going to, and if you've got it around a wheel, they've got to cut two cuts in it. So it's going to take them at least 8 minutes to cut through it. And you think, well, these people are so brazen that they don't seem to care. And if they do get caught, they get weapons out and scare people off. It's an absolute plague in the UK at the moment.
These bastards, they didn't even want it. I thought, well, they're taking it because they're going to resell it or something. No, they just took it for a joyride.
Did you get it back then?
I got it back, but it was wrecked. The body panels all need to be replaced. The battery is missing. They ripped it out. So they just absolutely, instead of opening that body panel, they just ripped it apart. The cylinder for the key, of course, was wired. So that needs to be replaced. One of my friends over in Edinburgh who works for the BMW dealer there, he picked it up for me. And of course, the police, to add insult to injury, they write me a nice, really endearing, nice letter telling me that they've got my bike and I owe them £200 for the
Jesus.
for the wrecker and
recovery.
If I fail to pick it up, they'll take legal action against me.
Oh, Christ.
So that's a real nice way to treat a victim of a crime. Anyhow, my friend goes and picks it up, and I paid the police the money, the impound lot, the money, and it's sitting right now at the BMW dealer up in Edinburgh, and we're trying to figure out whether I'm going to actually whether to put the money into the bike and fix it up, or whether just to junk it and sell it for the parts or something. I still haven't decided. And part of the reason I haven't decided is because I'm just not sure where I'm going to be with this disease or anything, and whether it's worth going over there and putting the time and money into that bike.
So you didn't actually get to do the West Coast?
No, I really wanted to. And the biker community up there was wonderful. I mean, people reached out to me. I put something about it on Instagram, and then it actually got picked up by a little local online newsletter up there. And people reached out. Some people even offered to loan me their bikes to go do it anyhow.
Wow.
Well, and you become attached to things. Like Fiona was just one of those bikes I'd become attached to. She was a 20-year-old FTR, 1300, and it had just been a dead solid, reliable bike. I bought it with only about 15,000 miles on it, even though it was that old. And it had been well taken care of and garaged. And it took me all through Europe. And I think it was that first big trip after I'd been diagnosed. So I kind of had an emotional attachment to it. I remember I was just ripped up that it had been stolen. And at that point, it hadn't been recovered yet. I don't think I just didn't feel like continuing on. So my wife and I the day after it got stolen, just got on a plane and went home.
Devastating.
Oh, I hadn't asked you now. That's a terrible story.
No, I thought you said we'd keep it lighthearted.
If you do make it back, though, you can borrow one of Noel's bike.
Absolutely, okay. You can, Brett. Yeah, and I normally say no to that, but definitely. Well, can I say, but the trip, you enjoyed the trip? It must have been amazing riding through Europe
up until that
point. In the summer. Yeah.
It was amazing, I think. And I visited some places, like I said, as a pilot, I've been up to a lot of Europe. Even on my vacations, I've rented cars and driven through a lot of Europe. But I saw even with the bike, I saw so many things that I had never seen. My favorite was, of course, as I think with any biker would be, was just the Alpine passes. I loved going the Stelvio, the Furka Pass, the St. Godards, the I never know whether it's Dolomites or Dolomiti Mountains.
Dolomites. Well, we say Dolomites anyway.
It was just incredible, just the riding. And I didn't see too much that Spain and France were embroiled in that heat wave that you had last summer. And that was horrible. But the rest of it, once I got up to higher elevations, was quite nice. And I went to Slovenia. I'd never been to Slovenia before. That was pretty cool. And just staying in the little pensions everywhere and riding a motorcycle and being on your own bike in Europe it was incredible. I just had a blast.
And this is sleeping in proper beds, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm not much of a camper anymore.
No. Great.
So, this was sleeping in hotels and pensions and things like that, and going out and having a few beers at night and enjoying myself and just seeing everything. I took the Channel train over once I got to Belgium, and took the train over to the UK and then rode up through the UK.
So easy.
Yeah, it really was. It was. I don't know why anybody does ferries anymore.
No, we're coming to that conclusion.
Back to the last big ride then. So tell us about what you had planned.
So the original plan was to ride from my home in Virginia down through Central America, of course, ship the bike across the Darien Gap, and then continue on down the west coast of South America all the way to Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world in Argentina. And I was planning to take so I left in October, late October, planned to be there by the end of March to Ushuaia. So, and that was probably going to be about, I'd say probably 12, maybe 15,000 miles in that amount of time. So in about 4 to 5 months. And the reality ended up being a little bit different because I did not make it to South America due to worsening health conditions, but I did make it all the way to Panama. So I made it 6,000 miles and through all the countries in Central America.
So was that in one go, or were you, I think I seem to see you were stopping and having to fly home and things like that?
So mostly it was one go. I made it all the way to Costa Rica, which is just before Panama. And that was about a month and a half on the road from where I left my home. My wife flew in once in Austin just before I left the States and met me there. And we stayed there for a couple of days. And then she flew again to San Jose, Costa Rica to meet me because I needed to fly home from Costa Rica because I had some important doctor's appointments I couldn't miss. And then I flew back down and continued on to Panama. And the idea was to fly home for the holidays then. That was right just before Christmas, and have the bike shipped to Peru, but that never ended up happening. And the logistics of the trip were a little bit difficult in that I had already declined enough my lungs and that I couldn't do high elevations, whereas I'd had no real problems going over all the passes in Europe. That was still fairly early on in my disease, and nobody had really expected me to decline as fast as I have, but the 10,000 foot, 9,000 foot passes didn't really present a problem for me. But once I got to Central America, I was finding in Mexico, even being at 7,000 feet, I was having some problems breathing. And so I decided to route myself along the coasts and not do the higher elevations, which made my decision for the Darien Gap. Most riders will ship their bike to Colombia and then ride from there. But Colombia and Ecuador both have some very, very high elevations. And we're not just talking a pass that you go over and back down in a couple of hours. We're talking days, if not weeks, at 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet elevations that I knew I just wouldn't be able to, honestly, to really survive at. My oxygen blood saturation would have been too low, and you risk organ damage and even heart attacks when it gets too low. I planned to ship to Peru, which was close to sea level if you go to Lima, and then mostly ride down the coast. There was a few areas where I might have to go to some higher elevations, but just for a very, very short while, so I figured I could tolerate it. And then the other logistical challenge, of course, was the doctor's appointments, having to fly home for those occasionally and carrying I could take about 15 different pills a day now. And having to carry enough pills to last me was going to take up half of one of my panniers. So that was another thing that I had to fly home to renew because you just can't carry that many pills at once.
That could have been fun crossing the Colombian border with that.
I mean, I'm just thinking, Brett, dealing with your disease, it's a real mental challenge on a day-to-day basis, I imagine. And I just wonder whether riding a bike, whether you were able to put it out of your mind at all as you were riding. Did it help?
Absolutely. As anybody listening who knows, riding a bike can be like therapy. And riding is a lot like flying in that when you're doing it, when you're not on autopilot on the plane, when you're actually physically flying the plane, you've got 100% of your concentration on it. It's the same with riding. Putting all my concentration, and especially riding in Central America, oh my God, you really have to concentrate because there are animals, people crossing the road in places that you wouldn't think anybody would be crossing the road. You're just riding along in the middle of nowhere, and some guy will come out of the trees on the side and just cross the road. And you're thinking, where did he come from and where's he going to? And tons of stray animals all over, and as well as farm animals alongside the road. And you're watching for those. There's potholes. There's semi trucks, big lorries coming the other way around blind curves because they get impatient to pass, and they're the biggest vehicle, so they don't really care who they smash. So you have to concentrate. And that really allowed me to put that daily routine of just packing up, riding. I like the routine. I like that being on the road. And so for me, that kind of everything else kind of vanishes for a while.
Yeah. Have you had any dicey moments on these big trips?
No, nothing especially big. I don't remember any dicey moments in Europe that I can recall, but in Central America, there's a few times where you're coming up or down a mountain and you'll be riding in your own lane and there's a car or a big, huge truck coming the other way in your lane trying to pass another vehicle on a blind curve. And so I just learned to ride really close to the shoulder so I could always dodge into the shoulder. But I don't know. On a bike, you feel like you usually have plenty of time. Like in a car, you'd probably panic and freak out. But on a bike, I always feel like, well, I can squeeze through if I have to. I never felt like it, like, whoa, I just missed dying. But yeah, there were definitely times where you're just, like, what the hell is this person doing?
You see, you sound like me. You never fall off. I thought I was a complete aberration, but it turns out there's two of us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's also not true, Noel.
The only fall I had was at a gas station in Central America. Of course, I thought my kickstand was down. It wasn't. So I went to lean it on the kickstand, and down it went. And I'm sitting, you're trying to hold it, and you realize at some point it's not gonna. I can't hold it. It's over too far.
Oh, it's a horrible feeling, isn't it? Knowing when to let go.
And then embarrassment kicks in. You're mortally embarrassed because you just dropped it at a gas station. It wasn't even a very interesting story, and people are all rushing to help you, and you're just like embarrassed. You just want to get it up and leave.
We were in where were we? In Spain on some trails, and the guy in front stopped. We weren't expecting to, and we had like a 4-bike pileup, all crashed into each other. Some bikes coming the other way. It's so embarrassing.
I've done that off road before, for sure. Usually it's I'm following too close to someone, or they're following too close to me.
Or the person in front brakes ridiculously. Yeah,
it's the person in front you're thinking of, Brett. That's the right answer. Slightly off topic. Should Noel watch Easy Rider?
Let me just give you some context, Brett.
You've never watched it either.
Hey!
Oh, for goodness sake!
That's the one with Peter Fonda, right?
Yeah, Dennis Hopper, Peter Fonda, and Jack Nicholson.
Thank you. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. A friend of mine has given me a lot of grief recently and can't believe that I've never seen this film, because I have a motorbike. He thinks that the two should go hand in hand. You've got a motorbike, you have to have seen Easy Rider.
Of course.
No.
Oh, it's
and
ridiculous.
Brett's just told us this.
Well, but the pair of you, I haven't got time for either of you. For not...
I don't know. All I know is it's got Peter Fonda in it, and that he rides a chopper, and that's probably all I can tell you about that motorcycle, about that movie.
We're both aware of it, but we know enough about it to know that it's probably not for us.
Yeah, I don't think it's very good, but you should watch it. It's got motorbikes in it.
Well, now I got to watch it.
Okay.
Thanks. I got to watch it.
Everybody should watch it. And then watch Silver Dream Racer afterwards.
No.
Don't watch that. That's
no,
terrible.
but you need to watch Dust to Glory. That's the one you have to watch.
Yeah, that is great.
That's the best.
So I would say the only motorcycle film probably worth watching that isn't, a really proper on any Sunday kind of motorbike film is the remake of Chips.
Did you watch that? I don't think I've seen that. That's got to be terrible.
That was good because it was filmed in a way that they'd never been able to film motorcycles before. So it's post drones. So that changed everything when it came to filming bikes. So there's some good bike stuff in it.
Seems unlikely.
I don't think it's called Chips too. I think it's just called Chips.
I watched Chips religiously as a kid.
Wasn't it great?
Yeah.
Wasn't it great? Yeah. I can't ride alongside someone without thinking about the show Chips, riding in that chip style. Yeah. Two abreast.
The highway patrol officers out in California, they still do that. Cause I remember that's where I grew up out there. And I remember seeing the Chips all the time, and they would all ride side by side like that out there on their big, they had those big Kawasaki 1000s, I think. Every kid wanted to be one of them.
So have you never ever ridden a Harley?
My dad, for a very short while, had a Sportster 1200. I was already an adult, and he bought this thing because it was cheap. And I rode it around the driveway and didn't like it at all. And that was the only time I ever rode one. And no offense to Harley people out there. I'm sure they're great bikes.
Yeah.
But
it's all right. 70% UK audience. We don't have any Harley listeners. You're in good company.
Where I saw a lot of Harleys was France.
Yeah, Denmark, they love Harleys. Norway loves Harleys. It's funny.
I was surprised to see as many as I did in France, and I didn't really see any down in Central America, except there's one gentleman, very interesting guy, Canadian, and I was at the border from Mexico to Guatemala. I was sitting on the curb waiting for their computer systems to come up at the border office, and this guy pulls up in all leathers and everything, and it's like 95 degrees. Which is 20, 30 degrees Celsius or something. And he's in all his leathers and pulls up on this older Harley. I couldn't tell you what the model is because I don't know anything about Harleys. Big cruiser bike. And I started talking to him. He was from Canada, and he goes south he's retired, goes south every winter to get out of the Canadian winters. And he's ridden that thing. He was going to an island called Roatan in Honduras this trip. He's actually been on that same bike to the tip of South America, which was the trip I was doing at the time. But, I mean, props to him. He's ridden that thing all over North America. And I know he's ridden around Europe, too. I just didn't catch whether he had actually shipped that particular bike to Europe and ridden it, or maybe ridden another bike or a rental or something over there. But he had ridden all over Europe as well, because we talked for a while. It was quite interesting.
You haven't got his contact details, have you?
I have. I'm a Facebook friend with him.
Oh, really? Seriously? Yeah. So me his name.
Strangely enough, he's got the same last name as me. So we said
no way.
Biker cousins.
You sound to be a good guy for the podcast. I was joking, but I thought you'd just be passing friends. But how funny.
Yeah. I quite like the idea of a Harley, but I think it's a little bit like I quite like the idea of a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, but you just can't really get away with them in the UK.
No.
You've got to be.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, you've got to be in your country to get away with it.
You do, but the thing is, it's not my style. I think for me, what I always tell people is I grew up riding dirt bikes. I like sitting straight up and having big wide handlebars and having my feet underneath me. I can't get with that sitting kind of, laid back like you're in a couch and your arms. And the one I really don't understand is the monkey bars where you put your arms above you. That's, again, had no offense to anybody. I'm sure people like that. I'm sure I'll get some hate for that. But
we do create a lot of offense on this podcast. You're all right, don't worry.
Yeah, it's just not my style.
Yeah.
I did see for the first time ever a Harley that I really, really liked, though. I saw one that was like, no, that's cool. I could ride that one. And I couldn't tell you what model it was or anything. I just liked the look of it. But it was highly modified.
So I've heard amazing things about Mexico. In fact, the whole of Central America looks and sounds amazing to ride through. What was a highlight for you?
Honestly, I think I liked El Salvador and Nicaragua the best, but Mexico's the largest. It took me 10 days to get through Mexico, which is still no time at all. I mean, I know people who have spent months there, and you could easily spend months there. I think a lot of the highlights of Mexico are in the higher elevations, which I couldn't do. A lot of the really beautiful towns and stuff, I couldn't make it up there. So unfortunately, I was stuck along the coast, which in a lot of areas was more industrial and or touristy. So I kind of tended to just cruise on through there, and they're very, very hot along the coast. I really enjoyed Nicaragua. It's the poorest country in Central America. It was like stepping back in time. I mean, all of a sudden instead of mopeds and everything, there were people riding horses and people pulling carriages with horses carrying their grain to the market or whatever. It was a whole different world.
What kind of mileage were you sort of taking it easy, or were you going for big mileages? Or
big mileage is a relative thing in Central America. So for me to bang out 500 miles here in the States is fairly easy. You just get on the highway and go. In Central America, the speed limits are much, much lower. They don't have as many like high-speed highways. Mexico had a few toll roads that were high speed, but you get off of those and everything's maybe 45 miles an hour, maximum 50. But then you have these, like I said, you have all these different things crossing and potholes. Then you have these speed bumps that come out of the middle of nowhere to keep your speed down. So you think you're going to do, if it says it's a 40 mile an hour road and most of us are used to riding 50, 10 miles an hour over or something like that. Well, it's not really possible down there. So what I found to be possible in the U.S. and to be possible in Central America were two different things. So I found myself gradually ratcheting my idea of a long day downwards and downwards and downwards till it got to the point where 150 miles was seeming like a long day anymore.
I've never come anywhere near to riding even 500 miles in a day. I think probably most we've done, Clive, is probably about 300 or something. And that seemed like a massive day, didn't it? 350 maybe.
They were long days. I remember we would ride from sort of 9 in the morning and, we'd do, I think, 13-hour days, which in a way, it doesn't really matter what the mileage is. It's just spending a long, long time in the saddle. And I guess that's the thing. So, 13-hour days. I think we were regularly doing 10 hours on the big European trips and 13 hours, which is great because you're there to ride, right? But, it's nice to have a break every now and again.
Doing 150 miles in Central America is easily a 6 or 7 hour day.
So, Brett, was your dream to go to Ushuaia? Was it always about doing it on your own, or would you ever consider? Because obviously, the reason you've stopped doing it now, we haven't really talked about that. So maybe you should talk about that. But would you consider doing it if you had some support that would willingly come with you?
I think I would. I'd always just planned on doing it on my own, just because I've always been more of a solo rider. I don't like holding other people up when there's something I want to stop and take a picture of or stop and look at. And I also don't like being dragged along to see something that I don't want to see by someone else. But definitely nowadays, I think the support I could possibly be done, and certainly I would have not, I've ridden with other people, and if they're friends and stuff like that, it's fine. Where I live and my life as an airline pilot, I tend to be off on the weekdays a lot, whereas most people only have weekends off. So I just didn't naturally have many people that could ride with me on weekdays. And I would work a lot on weekends since my kids are grown and out of the house. I didn't have to be home on weekends anymore. Did you want me to talk about why the ride didn't continue?
Yeah, please do.
When I mentioned earlier that I came home for the holidays, came home about December 20th. And part of that was also because it wasn't just the holidays. The bike was going to be shipped to Peru. And in Peru at that time, they had just had a lot of political and civil unrest due to their president being jailed and a new president taken over, and all the indigenous population who had mostly been the ones who had elected the president who was jailed, were outraged. They felt like their voice was being taken away. And so they were blocking roads, blocking motorcyclists and tourists for getting through. I think famously there were about 300 tourists stranded in Machu Picchu at one point. Some of the chat groups that I belong to of motorcyclists there's probably 100 to 150 people on these groups going south. We're encountering quite a bit of problems. In fact, one guy had been beaten up pretty good at a protest when he was trying to get through a roadblock. So I decided, well, I'll go home for a couple of weeks. It's the holidays. That works out fine. And by the time I get back to South America, hopefully the political unrest will be over. Well, when I went home, I must have caught something on the plane or in the airport or at some point along the way, because by the 24th, I found myself in the hospital here in Virginia with what's called para-influenza, which is just a respiratory flu. It's really a fairly simple flu. Most people, it wouldn't really cause any problem for. It's mostly elderly or very young children. But someone like me, who not only do I have this underlying lung disease, but I'm immunocompromised because the drugs they have me on suppress my immune system to keep it from attacking my own body. So I ended up with very dangerously low oxygen levels because of this flu and stayed in the hospital for a couple of nights. And what that did was it made my lung function decline again. I was still hoping to get back and telling myself and telling everybody I was going to get back down to South America. I like to think positive and think I'm going to get past this and it's going to be better. But as the weeks wore on after I got out of the hospital, I just wasn't getting any better. I felt like really, really weak, to the point where even going out and walking around my house or walking a half mile was very, very difficult for me. I was breathing really hard. Picking up anything, doing any kind of physical effort was very, very difficult for me. And I thought, I can't go back to South America and be in these remote areas where I could have a normal problem you would expect to have when you're adventure riding, like a bike falling over, getting stuck in sand or mud, having a punctured tire or something like that, that are just normal things that you would deal with. But I didn't feel like I could deal with them. I felt like I just didn't have the physical strength to pick up even the Touareg anymore. And I felt like, well, if I can't be self-sufficient, how am I going to do this trip? Because I can't be calling in some rescuers because I dropped the bike or because I punctured my tire. Hey, that should only be for if you break bones or something like that and you're stuck in the middle of nowhere. So, and on top of that, my doctors were pretty concerned with me. They said, you just can't afford any more respiratory infections. Every time you have one, it takes you down another notch, and it's getting on a plane and being around crowds like that. They were really worried about that. So between those two things, I reluctantly made the decision that maybe it wasn't wise to continue the ride and decided to stop in Panama.
So are you still able to get out on your bike at the moment?
It took me a good 3-4 weeks to get over to that flu, to get back to where I was actually feeling better. My breathing is still, my oxygen levels still are not recovered, and they probably will never go back to what my baseline was before. But the big difference is I'm local now. I'm within a couple hours of my house when I go out riding by myself. If I have to call in the cavalry, well, the cavalry is my wife. I've got my inReach and I can just text her. I'm not going to hit that SOS button and notify Garmin I'm in trouble, but I can text my wife from the inReach. There's a lot of areas where I live where there's no cell phone coverage at all. So you have to have that satellite communicator. But I can text her on it. It goes right to her phone and say, hey, bring the pickup and come pick me up because I broke down, or I'm stuck in mud, can you come help me? And I know she'll get in the truck and come help me out. So it's like a big difference. Now I have that safety net.
So how much of the day are you actually on the oxygen now?
So at night, I use it all night long.
Yeah.
And that's mostly to give my heart a break. Your heart beats, when your oxygen saturation is low, your body knows that. So it tells your heart to beat faster because that delivers more oxygen to your bloodstream, into your brain and all the important organs that need oxygen. So my heart tends to beat. I used to have a pretty low, high 60s, low 70s heart rate on average, and now it tends to average like 85. So the doctors want to just give my heart a break at night by having me on oxygen. It lets my heart slow down and keeps my oxygen up. And then when I exert myself, if I'm down in my shop working on the motorcycles or even, moving things around, if I'm even something as simple as making the bed, it really, really makes my oxygen saturation go down. So I wear a little portable oxygen concentrator for that. And I actually do bring it with me when I ride now. I modified Moskomoto was nice enough to donate a backpack to me. And I modified that a little bit so that this thing has to be able to breathe, to allow it to breathe better so it wouldn't overheat. And it goes in the backpack, and the backpack goes on my back, and then the oxygen cannula goes under my helmet. If I need it, it's there. I'm finding now I don't need it for just normal riding. If I'm riding on the road or anything, I'm fine. It's like sitting in my couch. I'm fine. I don't have any problems with it. But if I'm off-road riding where I'm standing up, especially since I'm bending slightly at the knees, and keeping that little bit of a crouch. It's a lot of effort on your quadriceps and your glutes, which are your two biggest muscles in the body. And so they suck the oxygen right out of my bloodstream. And I tend to start breathing really hard, even on a really simple off-road, just basically a dirt road, which isn't hard at all. But because I'm standing, in fact, I'm learning to sit more because it's just easier. As much as I don't like doing that, it's not natural to me when I'm off-road to be sitting. I'm learning techniques, but I'll turn the thing on and use it when I'm riding off road because it just ups my game a little bit. I think it allows me to ride at a little bit of a higher level by having that oxygen. Now I don't have to worry about it.
Well, I'm not a doctor. If Mrs. Anderson is listening to this, I am a doctor, and I'm prescribing no more bed making, no more chores, lots more bike trips.
But see, it's the bed making and the chores that make me feel normal. But I appreciate it.
Well, I was going to say, Brett, the picture you're painting, thank goodness you went back to motorcycles, because I'm just thinking about when you say going down to the bike, to the, what did you call it, the garage, the workshop, just to have that garage time, aside from riding bikes, just to have bikes in your life and garage time. It's such a great thing to have whilst you're going through this, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And one of the funny things is that I often, maybe morbidly so, start thinking like, at what point should I start selling off bikes? At what point when I physically decline enough? And then I think, I don't want to sell any of my bikes. I want to keep them till I die.
Yeah.
But because I just even like looking at them. I like to go down to the garage and just, oh, this is my kingdom, my
I do this all the time.
You're going to need one to ride after the lung transplant anyway. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. I want to be the first lung transplant recipient to ride a motorcycle to the tip of South America. So I'll need, if I ever sell any, I think the one I'll probably keep is the Touareg.
Agreed.
I don't know. I love them all though. It's hard to, it's like your babies. You don't want to get rid of your children. Some people might want to.
Well, you haven't met my kids.
I love them. I told my wife, I'm like, I don't want to leave you with a bunch of things to have to get rid of after I die. But then I start talking like that, and she starts crying, so I can't even talk about that stuff anymore.
Women.
Like I said, I couldn't have gallows humor. I told her I'll help her pick out her next boyfriend. He's not like that too much.
But you can't ride your bikes.
Yeah, he can't ride the bikes.
Yeah.
No, those are mine. She has to keep the pins, Gower. She has to keep that.
Can I have the famous last question?
Go on, do your last question then.
Now, this might seem a bit odd. I've been in two minds as to whether to ask it. It only came to me as we've been chatting. But I'm not going to get the chance to ask somebody this.
Think it through before you ask it, because he accuses me of having no filter, Brett, but
That's all right.
Possibly worse than me.
Okay, buckle up. Brett, where were you on the day of 9/11? Were you flying in America at the time?
I was on what they call on reserve, which is like being on call. So I was sitting in Chicago, where I was based at the time, at a hotel on call, and I remember seeing it on the news like everybody else.
All right. Oh, I just thought maybe if you'd been up in the air, I would love to have heard what that was like.
No, that would have been an interesting story.
Yeah,
but people ask me that a lot, and unfortunately, my story is not very good. I didn't get to divert to Canada or anything like that. But unfortunately, I knew two of the pilots involved in that.
Oh, really? That's horrendous.
Yeah. One of them, I used to be an instructor pilot for my company and out in Denver. And so one of the pilots, who was the co-pilot on the one that hit the World Trade Center, I had actually trained him. So I'd worked with him for about 3 weeks, I should say, and knew him really well, really good guy. And then the other one was another training guy that I knew, and he was the captain of the Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. And I knew him fairly well as a work colleague. So that kind of hit me hard, just knowing.
Yeah, I bet.
I didn't expect to know anybody out of a company as big as mine, and let alone two of them.
Yeah, that's incredible. Brought the mood down even lower, Noel. Thanks for that. Jesus, it's normally a funny podcast, this one.
You can blame Noel for his last one.
Brett, thank you so much for doing this. We need to just give the last lastbigride.org. Is that the right web address?
You got it, yep.
Lastbigride.org, and then jump on and stick some money in there. We need at least 1,000 people to put a $5 in there. Let's get it up to $25,000.
That would be great.
Do you know what? On these things, normally they reckon the throughput of these social media things, if this counts as social media, you get about 1% of people buying something or contributing or something like that. But we need We need everybody to do it this time.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. And I'll come through when I come to the UK and thank everybody individually too.
Well, what do you say after a story like that? Just massive admiration for Brett and the way he's approaching this. There's one positive thing we can do, and that's donate. So please stick a $5 in lastbigride.org. Try and get this horrible disease cured. Right, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.